Hello and welcome. My name is Kendra Kunoff, and today I wanted to talk about something that it's actually been really present for me for a while now. And it's the distinction that I would say between, there's different words that you could use, but the words I'm going to use for today are reported life. And I said versus in this. I don't really mean that they're opposed, but I want to distinguish between what I call reported life, created life, and chosen life. So if you're on here, hello, and maybe just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay, or, oh, hi, Allison. Thank you. Okay, good. So reported life is, I would say that for a lot of the world, it's what would be considered typical. We all do it. So all three of these, we all do at different times. So we all do it at some point where it's like it's the experience of life happening to you. It's like, oh, and then this happened, and then that happened, so I'm calling that reported. Or one of my mentors, Rich Litvin, uses that term also, where it's like we're reporting on life happening as though we have no choice, or we have no kind of active will in the matter. It's just like, oh, then this happened, and so I had to do this. You know, you hear people talk a lot about like what they have to do, and that's all in the mentality of reported life. Created life then is in that sense. So this is what you hear a lot more of in either the coaching world or in the personal growth and transformational world. There's often this idea like we create our reality, and so there's different spectrums of that, right? But there's definitely all the way from the side of I create everything that happens in my life, to just the side of personal responsibility, which is, you know, how am I creating this? And also really looking around and saying, what do I want in my life, and how am I going to go about creating that? It's stepping outside of the sense of like, oh, everything just happens to me and I ended up here and I can't really control it. I have to do this. And it's stepping into like, wait, how do I want it to be? And how am I going to go about creating that? And I'm going to go into all of these and talk about how I see them weaving together, and actually where I see the truth and the value in all three of them. But right now I just want to give kind of brief definition. So we've got reported life, like life happening to you. I had to do this, then this happened, so I had to do that. Created life it's also related to desire. So that sense of like, what do I want? Rather than just having to accept what is, what do I want? And then how might I go about creating that? And also looking from the past and saying, wait, what have I done to create the circumstances that I'm in? So the different piece that I would add, and some of this is semantics, but I actually think words are really important. And so I heard this distinction between reported and created life, and something felt like it was missing to me. And I really like kind of chewed on that for a long time. And for me, what that is I believe that there's also this distinction of chosen life. And chosen life acknowledges that we don't necessarily get to have everything exactly the way we want it all the time, and we can still choose it. So when I hear people talk about created life, I know that some of the people that are talking about this, again, it's semantics, and we're actually talking about something very similar. But I also hear a lot of what I would call spiritual bypassing, or sort of an ungrounded version of created life, which doesn't acknowledge that things do come into our lives, I believe for a reason, but that we didn't necessarily create, but that we can choose them. And there's a way of looking around at our life, and rather than having the mentality of like, oh, this like happened to me and I guess I just have to take it, that there's a way of looking around and saying like, oh, this actually is my life right now. I may be in the process of creating something else, but right now, these are the walls around me. This is the money I have in the bank. This is my family. This is the place I live. And to fully choose it, to say, yes, this is how it is, without taking a victim stance to it. So, here's one of the reasons that that's important to me is, first of all, I see it weaving quite beautifully with created life. I think that there's not one without the other in a lot of ways. So there are, for the example that always comes up for me, and I hope this translates, but was really around like when my son was born. My son, I mean, he's incredible. He's incredibly bright. He's really interesting. He asks me just these incredibly interesting questions. He's funny. He's always been playful. And he's always been really intense. And it has challenged me a lot to be his mother. But I fully choose him. Did I create the intensity of my child? Did I create that he was colicky? Did I create, I don't know, maybe karmically I did, maybe unconsciously I did, maybe. For me, looking at that in particular with my son, there was a way that really choosing, like I choose this human being exactly as he is, and then I create my life from there. An example of really looking at what I would call the weave of chosen life and created life for me had to do with when my ex-husband and I were separating, and I like looked at our relationship and the way that it was. And in one hand, I could say like, wow, I can really see the ways that I created that. I can see the part that I played. I can see things that led to that. I can see choices that I could have made differently. And then in other ways, I also could see like, wow, this is, I mean, in one sense you could say I created it simply by choosing the person I chose, which created all kinds of like extraordinary, beautiful things in my life, and also ultimately led us to this place where we were separating and getting a divorce and had a 1-year-old child. And so, yes, there's like one sense of created life in that, but there was also a way that I could look around and go like, okay, however it is, and maybe once I get through the chaos of everything that needed to happen in that, I could really then look at all the ways that I created it and how I want to create my life going forward. But for me, there was a really important step that had to do with like choosing it just as it was. Going like, wow, this is exactly how my life is right now. And I choose to fully inhabit it. So for me, a chosen life is really different than like a passive acceptance, or kind of like, oh, well, I guess I just have to take it or keep it how it is. But it is inhabiting it really fully. And the tricky piece that I often see when people use the word created life is that there's a hopping out of, kind of like a wanting to leave how it is now in order to get somewhere better. Okay, I'm gonna create it like this, but I don't want it like I have to push this away. I don't want it like this. And I really believe in the power of choosing what's so right now. As a first and essential step to creating whatever it is that we want in the future. That we can't actually create something if we refuse to inhabit where we are fully. Another example is, well, one example I would say is I want to get really, the other thing that I don't always like about the dichotomy of reported versus created being like a dualistic. I mean, I think this probably also comes from having been raised a Buddhist, and so I'm sort of fundamentally non-dual. And so I'm always like, whenever there's a duality, part of me wants to step in and say yes. And so one of the things that's challenging for me is I also look at, like, for instance, what's happening in Texas right now. Those people who are living in these areas where their homes are being devastated and people are needing to evacuate. And then there's people who, don't even have the money to evacuate, right? Like, I mean, I could cry right now just thinking about it and imagining that being me with my children, and like, what would I need to do if I was in that circumstance? And again, this is where the weave happens. Because I think that while most people who talk about this they don't, it's not that any part of them actually believes this. There's like a subtle shaming that can slip into the idea of a reported life. Because really, that hurricane did just happen. And I was going to say no one created it, but frankly, I think we all created it, and our ancestors created it. And but that's where we are now. And so it is true. We can look at sort of extraordinary examples of this, right? Like Nelson Mandela, who I would say created his experience by choosing it fully. I don't know Nelson Mandela, and so I'm, of course, only speaking from third hand and what I've heard reported. But the sense that I get is that when he was in prison, that the way that he was able to choose, like, I'm here, I'm going to do whatever I have to do to be fully here in order to create the experience of life that I want. Or you could say that I'm committed to. Like, what is the experience that I'm committed to having? And again, that can get tricky. That I also see this way where it often seems like, well, I'm committed to having an experience of joy, so I'm just gonna pretend like I'm not really angry right now. And actually, this is a perfect sort of little bridge here, because that's happening for me right now. I'm having the experience where I'm actually quite angry in a relationship. And I had a friend point out to me yesterday something that he saw over time in our friendship around, he said, if I may, can I tell you what I see? And I said, yes. He said, I see that when you're angry and you don't face it and you don't process it, you don't express it, that you get kind of lethargic and depressed. And I had never actually seen that before, but I could see this way that I've been kind of like, meh, and I've been avoiding things and continually like still meeting my life, but there's this way that it's been a little bit in a fog for about a week. And that I think it really does have to do with it. There's this place that I have been angry in this relationship that's quite close to me and not had a way to express it yet. And so for me, again, that's the piece of the chosen life that's so important. That it's not like I choose anger and I'm gonna be angry, but it's like, oh, that's what's so. And actually, there's no created life without honoring that. It doesn't mean that I have to give a lot of energy and credence to it, like I'm right and I should stay angry and this person deserves it. It's more like, that's true in me. Now, what do I need to do? But if from kind of a misunderstanding of the idea of a created life, I think like, well, if I think about being angry, that means I'm creating being angry because what I put my attention on grows, or these sort of things, and so I keep trying to avoid that I'm angry. That's the missing of the chosen piece that actually I think allows us to step into the created life piece. So I want to backtrack for a minute because I do want to underscore like this challenge that's, while I think this is true, and again, like really extraordinary examples are what show us that this is a potential for humans. These are examples like Nelson Mandela. Of course I'm going to blank. I mean, frankly, I think that Trevor Noah is another example. If you read his autobiography or his memoir, is that we all have this choice, but it does a disservice to look at external reality and imagine that the people in it are creating every piece of it. It avoids and it sort of spiritually bypasses things like systemic racism, systemic sexism, poverty, again, like where nature comes in and there's a hurricane or there's an earthquake and it's like, wow, life just happened, or you got born here, or, you were sexually molested as a child and that you didn't create that. For some people, I get that it's empowering that like to choose the perspective that you made a life contract. And if that's empowering for you, I say, please, by all means, use it. But for a lot of people, that's not true. So this is the way that I want to say that there's actually a value or a use, in a sense, rather than sort of subtly shaming the idea of a reported life, is like, oh, right, it's valuable to look and say some things kind of exist in external reality and acknowledge them. And then that moves us into the place of chosen reality or chosen life, which is like, okay, am I going to choose it? And if I can't choose it, what am I going to do about it? So, our family kind of lives in this realm. Like we get born into a family, and to fully choose the lives that we're in actually inherently takes us out of being a victim, because we go like, okay, here I am, I'm going to choose it. And at the same time, that puts me into a space where I almost inherently, like, it's not have to necessarily, but I'm called forward to either choose the pieces of my life or see what I want to do. How can I create them differently? Let me pause for just a second because I see a comment. Leanne, is it about having full awareness and acceptance of our present lives and emotion before we can make our choices for the creative life we dream of? I would say, yeah, in its most basic form, that is really how I see it. And it also because it's a more empowered stance. So again, I do think this is what a lot of people are talking about when they talk about created life, but the word itself has a tendency to kind of pop us out like, wait, this isn't what I wanted to create. And so then there's this like, okay, can I choose it? Can I choose that, like, whatever I have created up until this point, this is where it's led me. And then that there are these pieces, like the family that we're born into, or the family that we get born into our lives, again, like my children. This is a story I tell a lot in various forms, is like, my son has been this great challenge. I mean, he's been this great inspiration and this like the great love of my life, but he's been a great challenge. And I'm so glad that he was my first child, because I spent those 4 years until I had my daughter just like repeatedly having my ass handed to me and realizing I had no idea what I was doing, and I was probably failing most of the time, and still choosing and then doing the best I could to create what I wanted to create for my family. And then I had my daughter, And she was like born smiling, and she just like, she sort of prances about her life, and she, you know, goes up to people and she says like, hi, I love you. And like, I didn't do it, you know, they got born the way they got born. And if I'd had my daughter first, I think I would have thought like, I am just such a good parent. Look at this child that I created. And it really showed me something about, I mean, this is certainly with children, but I think that there's an element that's true, which is like, you know, I made them both, and I also like, I didn't have a lot to do with who they are. I'm not responsible for how easy she is, and it wasn't my fault that he's as challenging as he is. And that there's just this way, so there's ways that life is like this, but then we can fully embrace and choose all of it. Let's see, I just got myself on a tangent. Oh, but this piece, so from The Chosen, is I did another Facebook Live recently about boundaries. And this is a place where I see that also being true. Sometimes it's like, oh, I guess I have to choose all of it. That means it's just supposed to be okay the way it is. Wait, what do I, you know, getting kind of caught in that. And I see this as one of the places where boundaries comes in. So, like I have a family member that I'm having a really challenging time with, and I for a long time I kept judging myself. I was like, there's got to be some practice that I could do so that I can be less triggered by her. This is all my responsibility. I have to take 100% responsibility for this. And that means it's on me to change. I should be able to just be with her however she is, whether she ever changes or not. And at some point, it actually came with kind of like choosing myself, like including myself in the circle of choosing my life. I was like, oh, I am not capable of that yet. And if I honor that, then actually the thing I need to do is set boundaries so that we can continue to behave lovingly towards each other. Like actually when we spend more than 24 hours together, we're not loving towards each other anymore. And if I'm going to take responsibility for this, I also have to take responsibility for that I actually am not capable of accepting her fully the way she is right now, and set a boundary so that that actually creates more love between us. So I see that included in a chosen life. So I want to pause one more time here because I saw 2 comments come in. Priscilla, how do you think we can express our anger without being reactive? Well, so I want to give a brief answer there because I would say that it's a Facebook Live for another time. So there's some of that comes in terms of our own, like what we just need to do inside ourselves. Like I have some anger, I just need to express that, not with this person, for instance, that have a lot of anger with right now. And I don't know about without being reactive, like, I actually think sometimes just moving it through our bodies is really important. And often that's the first step to being able to have what can be a more constructive conversation with the actual person. Or again, setting the boundaries. Like, in order for me to want to be around you, I would need us to have a conversation like this. Or I need to know that you'll leave when you say you'll leave. Or these things. But in order to be less reactive, my experience and what I see in people is often we need to move that energy through our bodies first. And I really do suggest doing that in a physical way, using your whole body, using your voice. Typically, the fewer words, the better. You can scream no, or fuck you, or I hate you, or stop it, or, things like that. But it's less about trying to get all the words out that you wish to say to them. But, like temper tantrums on a bed are really useful. Going into the woods and, having a place to like really scream it out. Or if you have a fireplace, you can chop wood and yell it out. You could do an anger dance, put on put on like Beyonce's Freedom and just like really loud, but you got to move everything, stomp it out, move your arms, move your legs, scream it really loud. That's my suggestion. That's the short answer, and more for another time. Lisa, as a Buddhist and a mother of a young person with severe autism, I struggle with choosing and acceptance, and I avoid. It makes sense to me, lethargic. Yes. Totally. I mean, I think that's one of the places, where we get confused in the culture as it is. What does choosing and acceptance mean? And does it sort of mean this passive, like lying down and just taking life the way it is? Like, well, I guess I just have to say yes. And this is exactly, I mean, I don't have an autistic child, but that's what I'm speaking to, Lisa, which is like, there's lots of people who have circumstances in their life that, again, you can believe that you have a soul contract or not. I have no idea. I got no stake in that game. But, from my perspective, like, at least you didn't consciously choose it. And you didn't consciously create it. You didn't say like, yes, this is the life I'm creating. I will have an autistic child. And it's really hard. It's really hard. And I imagine, anyway, that many of the people around you have no idea how to respond, how to support. I could imagine it feeling really lonely. And then again, I do believe that we have choices about how we respond to our circumstances. So, these are kind of the last like points that I want to make about this. And I had this one last, but I want to say it first. So I believe that this is truly a personal choice, and that it is none of our job to tell anybody else whether they should be choosing their life, whether they should be creating their life, to invite them to look at how they're creating their life, or to point out how they're not choosing their life. That is not our business. Unless somebody has come to you and asked you for your advice, or they're paying you as a coach, unless somebody has explicitly said, I want you to play this role in my life, frankly, it's none of your business. And I say that I say that from experience. I say that as a person who, can be quite judgmental of both myself and others, and has a lot of opinions, and, often thinks that if everybody would follow my advice, their lives would be much better. So I say that from experience. But I really deeply believe that it does not serve us, and it does not serve others to come from that stance, and that it's really always about looking inward. And that if we have, for instance, a relationship with a friend or a family member who we just look and we're like, oh, I can see all the ways that they could more fully choose their life, or they could create their life, or they don't see how much power they have, that's a place to look and go like, wow, I really think I'm at the effect of whether they choose their life. How do I take responsibility for this? Like, I'm having a reaction. And then, you, again, boundaries, like, you may choose not to spend as much time around that person. If if they're one of the people in your life who you just hear them all the time, it's like, oh, and then this happened, and then I had to do this, and then, everything is sort of out of their control, and it drives you nuts. You can make the choice of how much time you choose to spend with them. Or I've had circumstances, especially with people who I see repeatedly get into the similar kind of relationships, romantic relationships, and it drives me totally crazy. Or not be able to get out of them, and depending on the depth of the relationship, sometimes I just take a little step back. That's me taking responsibility for my own experience. And then there's other people where I've been able to say, like, look, for me to be able to support you, for me to want to support you, there's some things I need to say. Do you want to hear them? And then that gives us some choice. So I need to set that as a framework first. But The thing I would say about both our created life and our chosen life is that I really do believe that we have far more power than we often give ourselves credit for. And both in terms of what I would call that choosing of our circumstances and the capacity actually to be in them with equanimity, which isn't, I don't believe that that's passive. I think Ram Dass has a quote that goes something like, the world is perfect exactly as it is, including my desire to change it. So we have to also, like I said before, like include ourselves in the circle of choosing. This is who I am. And to like let that be true, to fully inhabit the truth of who I am in this moment and my life such as it is. But there's a lot of, and I want to actually do a whole Facebook Live on this as well, in terms of the practices that go with this, and that have a lot to do with slowing down. They have a lot to do with breath. Certainly, meditation is these days, or mindfulness is kind of like a catchphrase for all of these things. And I believe is in some ways largely misunderstood, but that capacity to take a pause in the midst of everything that's going on and to find what, kind of our center. Again, that's another sort of cliche word in this day and age, but like the way I think of center, especially also, it's like this through line where we're connected to the heavens and we're also connected to the earth. And it's not like airy-fairy up here, but it's also not weighted down by life. Like we have access to all of it. And that takes pausing, that takes stillness, that takes breath, that takes conscious awareness of our spine. But I have 2 children. They're 8 and 4, and I'm the one that's with them most of the time. And of course it drives me crazy. And of course sometimes I kind of lose it. But it's also this capacity to widen around it and recognize like, oh, I have choice in response to how I want to relate to them. And that, to me, that's that bridge where I think chosen life is so important. I choose a life where I am with my children most of the time. And then there's created life, right? Like then how do I choose to respond such that I create the experience for myself and my children that I most want us to be having? And that goes again with our power to create. I mean, again, this might be kind of like something for another time, but I recently reflected, and so this is actually one powerful thing that I would suggest doing. Is so much of the time, especially if we live in any kind of a culture that encourages created life, there's like a looking ahead that comes with that. There's like the big dream, there's the big vision, there's where do you want to be in 5 years, there's like constantly taking steps towards that. And it's so important to look back and really say like, what have I created? Both to get real honest with ourselves, but a lot of times, most of us have created a shit ton more than we give ourselves credit for because we're moving so fast and we still see how much more we could create. So I looked back recently, and it's so hard for me to believe. I keep like doing the math and thinking it's gotta have been longer. But it was just 3 years ago that I was 3 years ago, I was in quite a bit of debt. I went to a leadership intensive that I put on my credit card. I stayed with friends because I couldn't afford the hotel to go there. And in that time frame, I was always juggling, like when was I going to get my child support check and when was the rent due? And there was that's how tight money was. And in that time, I've been mostly a single mother. I've had, my son was, 3 years ago, my son was 5 at the time, my daughter was 1. And then in that span, I've gone from that place to sometimes like forgetting to invoice my clients, and actually loaning one of the fathers of my children money so that he could invest, so that like our family could do that, realizing I didn't need the child support anymore in the way that I did. Like it wasn't this thing, to being able to invest in my own professional training. I'm traveling to London this year to teach. So all of this isn't like, the point of this isn't so much to toot my horn about money, but standing where I was standing 3 years ago, that looked impossible. I had no idea how I was going to get where I wanted to be. And I was doing work that, it's all good work, but wasn't like absolutely what I wanted to be doing. In that time frame, actually I went through about a year's period of time where I also took on, well, maybe 6 months, but I was watching other children at the same time that I had my children, to make like that little bit of extra money that I needed to kind of bridge the gap. And again, that's like chosen for me. Like, is that create? Sometimes I think that that's not held inside of created, because I didn't want to create myself as a nanny. That wasn't the life I was creating, but it was the life I was choosing, because at that time I would rather be with my children for those 3 hours in the afternoon and have another child with us than hire extra childcare to be with my kids so that I could put my attention on creating my business. That's the life I was choosing. But again, I want to underscore that so many of us, like, actually we do really have so much more power to both choose and to create than we often give ourselves credit for. So one piece of that is to really take time on a regular basis to reflect back and really look like, what have I created? What am I so proud of? And my guess is most of you will be shocked, like, holy shit, I created, like, wait, when was that? When did that happen? Because I could not believe it. It's going to be 3 years in October. It's been less than 3 years. And then the other piece is, it's so easy to just get overwhelmed. You know, we can look at like, but this is that place of choosing, which is like, yes, I can see that big vision and I choose my life as it is, and I choose each step that I take. And it's in the taking of the small steps. At every single step, I choose this step. And then looking around, okay, from exactly where I am, not just looking at the big dream and like, what do I want to create, but actually looking exactly where I am. What is the next best step for me right now? And in that way, so many of us have way more power to create the lives that we dream of than we give ourselves credit for. So I'm going to complete there for today. And I know there's all these little topics that I said that's a Facebook Live for another time. So maybe I'll go through and pull those out and get those on the books. But for now, really looking at not only what is the distinction between a reported, a created, and a chosen life, but actually understanding the truth of each one, the value of recognizing each one, and then the way that they weave together. Because I don't see them, to me, they're not a hierarchy, and they're not like one is more true than the other. It's like they're facets of the same life, and it's being able to recognize which spot I'm in and how they can weave together. So I hope this was valuable, and I look forward to any questions or comments from any of you watching the replay, and I'll come back and respond as soon as I get the chance. Thanks so much, and have a great day.